Contact zones. An in-depth analysis of Mary Louise Pratt's Arts of the Contact Zone.
Contact zones are very prevalent in today's society. They bring together people of different cultures and origins. Mary Louise Pratt describes them in her essay called Arts of the Contact Zone. She explains the concept by alluding to a puzzle, with the pieces being her son's obsession with baseball cards, a Quechua nobleman's letter to the Spanish king, the definition of literate arts, parallels contact zones, the problem of imagined communities, and the culture's values and ideas course. These seven pieces all connect to her main argument that contact zones allow people to interact between cultures, leading them to the breaking down of the cultural boundary.
So, what is a contact zone? Well, by breaking down the words, one might believe that it's a place where things come in contact with each other. In a meeting, for example. After digesting literature on the topic, delving into conscious thought, and generating ideas, it's usually followed by the conclusion that a contact zone is a place where people of different cultures, ethnicities, and lineages come together. This typically results in a form of conflict or clash between these groups, usually where one group may have more power over the other.
Pratt discusses the concepts of literacy arts and parallels as broad pieces that make up the overall contact zone, saying that in the modern era, they are becoming more widely visible, more pressing, and more decipherable. Their presence in newer times has a more prominent role and is able to reach and enlighten a more diverse group of people. Literacy arts have an assisting role in helping to explain why the contact zone is beneficial, while the parallels suggest that a contact zone might not always be ideal. By including both, Pratt herself is creating a contact zone by presenting 2 points and allowing room for personal interpretation and debate. Leaving out the parallels would leave her debate one-sided and would go against her whole argument.
Pratt discusses three main situations that she connects as concepts of the contact zone. The first concept is a story about her son Sam growing up with his fascination in baseball. Pratt explains her son's obsession with baseball cards as a sort of contact zone, since baseball was his point of contact with adults. Baseball history was his expertise, enabling him to start conversations and hold his own as an equal, rather than an inferior, with adults. We know from our experiences that when we are treated on the same level as adults, it makes us feel better and understand the adult's point of view.
Pratt didn't include this story for no real reason. Her point of describing Sam's experience with education and the gateway created by his passion is to show an experience which is relatable to everyone. All of us have gone through school, experienced the mundane lessons taught with no context, and had tried to figure out something for ourselves at one point. By sharing her son's journey of finding a way to learn things through applying concepts to real life, Pratt gives the audience a better understanding of the way contact zones can impact learning throughout their lives.
As mentioned before, literate arts make up a big portion of a contact zone. The concept of imaginary dialogue, for example, can be applied within Sam's situation. Pratt describes imaginary dialogue, or communities, as language being viewed as a universal tool that is used throughout the community. In her example of Sam, Pratt describes how teachers were simply giving him basic concepts with no reference or context. In other words, a universal message, expecting him to internalize it. In order to be able to fully comprehend the lessons and apply them to real life, Sam had to do work on his own.
Parity of authority is also mentioned within Sam's story. The teachers, intent on solely conveying their message and maintaining their status of authority, have no room made in their lessons for individual thought or discussion. These are negative, but the message is still delivered. Functionally, the message being delivered can either be negative, neutral, or positive, but in the end, it's still received and mostly understood.
Absolute heterogeneity of meaning can also be an outcome of a situation like Sam's. This peril of the contact zone depends on the way one views the message being received. If a message is seen as chaotic or confusing, then it will be so. If it is approached with a more open mind, there is a possibility of understanding. Students are often faced with this problem. When teachers present an idea, one student could be utterly lost with no comprehension of the message being delivered, while another may use outside resources to apply and connect the idea like Sam did.
Guaman Poma's letter to the Spanish king is one of the largest analyzed sections of Pratt's essay, making up the second idea she connects to. It is an entire context zone within itself. A letter sent to attempt to communicate points to break down the walls between two battling cultures, which was never received or read by the intended audience.
By including this story about Poma's letter to the king, Pratt gives historical evidence or context of a contact zone. This validates her information and ideas and gives it the credibility of something proven over time, something that her other two stories do not provide.
An example of critique, another one of the later arts, was presented within Pratt's text as a section of Poma's work called Good Government and Justice. This was a discussion of his views on the current Spanish government and his solutions to the problems that he saw, and was also a critique of the Spanish abuse and exploitation that was occurring at the time.
Bilingualism makes up the essence of Poma's work. He wrote it in both Quechua and Spanish in an attempt to convey his ideas as clearly as possible to a broader audience. His effort to communicate with the other culture, which was, at the time, completely decimating his own, shows how important understanding is between people of two different understandings.
However, an attempt to clearly communicate the ideas can be hindered by the perils. One peril of the contact zone, the concept of dead letters, explains how letters such as Poma's can quite literally be intercepted or lost. Poma's letter was never received by the Spanish. In fact, it was found nearly 800 years after it was written, far too late to make any impact on his previous problems.
The concept of unread masterpieces also fits within Poma's contact zone, as his letter itself is an unread masterpiece. It contains ideologies and concepts that were not analyzed or read thoroughly, which means his concepts were never understood completely. This was partly because the letter was never received, but also because when it was found, it was too late to do anything about it.
In Pratt's final section within her essay, she touches on her own observations of the outcomes of incorporating contact zones within classrooms and how it differs from the classroom setting that existed prior to it. In doing so, Pratt describes how a quiet lecture class became one filled with discussion and people exchanging points of view rather than a single message being presented by the lecturer or teacher. In this way, the conversation changes from a one-side perspective to one with multiple sides.
Pratt's Cultures, Values, and Ideas course is the last example of a contact zone that she includes in her essay. It has a different impact than the rest as it specifically talks about how contact zones impact a classroom setting over a classroom without it. Pratt's main argument against treating classrooms like communities is that students are taught from one point of view only, and that anything else is wrong, which lacks diversity.
She encourages the formation of contact zones, emphasizing the importance of gaining perspective on ideas or culture from outside sources, the literary art of collaboration. Collaboration creates opportunity for open debate and communication within the classroom, a concept that other people who research this concept, such as Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, touch on in their own works.
This bringing together of ideas, such as in the Cultures, Values, and Ideas course that Pratt describes, might sound like the way to go, but sometimes brains collaborating doesn't flow as smooth as it appears. Two perils of the contact zone, miscomprehension and incomprehension, are perfect examples to represent the negative side. While miscomprehension emphasizes taking an idea the wrong way, incomprehension is defined as simply not comprehending the idea at all. These similar ideas point towards the thought that when something is not understood properly, or at all, it prevents great ideas, such as the incorporation of the contact zone in the class, from working properly by this unnecessary conflict.
When only a single definition of literacy is valued and encouraged within schools, alternative literature practices are diminished, and messages that differ from the homogeneous definitions are considered wrong and invalid. Opening the door to a broader perspective of literacy dissolves this barrier and allows for free-flowing dialogue. If conversation isn't a fixed concept, it creates a contact zone which allows for people to learn through their interactions and those unlike themselves.